Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is 9 o'clock Eastern, 6 o'clock Pacific. You have reached the No Name Cinema Society. It is episode 53.3, our classic movie discussion, and we are here to talk about a big one of the biggest box office hits of all time, Steven Spielberg's E.T. Hi, everybody. My name is Jonathan Betzler. I'm here in my home in Los Angeles. As you can see, we are doing E.T. tonight. Got my buddy Mark with me. Sadly, as you've probably been hearing, this is our final regular season classic movie discussion as we wrap up the No Name Cinema Society. The show is coming to an end. These are last couple regular season episodes, and then we're going to do the finales on Oscar week. So let's turn to my co-host for this evening. First, a funny-looking alien visitor who can heal and who's always funny, Nate Shelkey.
Hello.
Hey, Nate, you got a low angle happening.
Oh, I do? Yeah, because my big computer died, so I'm on the laptop here.
Oh, very cool. All right.
So you get a little fun double chin action. So I look more ET-like, so it's nice.
It's a different perspective, different vantage point on the world of always funny Nate Shelkey. And also with us, a passionate young lad who feels Nate's feelings, Devin Michaels is here.
Hello there.
And you're also at a new location, little art background.
I am. I'm at my girlfriend Kelly's apartment, and this is a lovely painting in her living room.
All right, guys, here is our schedule for this series of episodes. Of course, tonight is our classic movie discussion, E.T. Nate will be back for our 37th Sound Off, in which we're going to do an obscure movie discovery. Jim should have a second run, and I'm supposed to count down my top 5 movie scores of all time. And that's coming up this Monday. You excited about that, Nate?
I'm totally jazzed.
Are you more excited for that than you are about tonight?
I'm not certain everything that's going on, so it's kind of like Monty Hall, you know. It's like door number 2. I'm not certain what's there. I know what's going on with this one.
It'll keep you on your toes, the Sound Off.
I mean, there could be a goat behind the second episode. I don't know, you know.
You could be. We'll find out Monday. Anyway, Nate, are you drinking tonight? I know Devin's probably not.
I am not yet. Well, I'm drinking, but not drinking. So I'm having some sweet watermelon lemonade instead.
Ooh. That sounds complicated. And Devin's probably got water, which is boring.
Yeah, I feel like I'm drinking sweet watermelon lemonade right now.
Oh, but you feel the feelings of it. Yeah, you can.
Yeah.
I am drinking Elysian Space Dust IPA here, which I enjoy. It's LA brewed, I believe.
Nice.
Do you know it, Nate?
I do, yes. And I appreciate the space-related beer.
Right? That's what I was thinking. My hint in the last classic was that our movie tonight would be one of the biggest box office hits of all time. That was number 1 on a top 5 I did on the Sound Off in episode 51.4, so just 2 Sound Offs ago. And that was one of, I think Devin watched that one. It was the top 5 child performances, and I did name Henry Thomas in E.T. the greatest child performance of all time, and we'll get to that when we talk about performances. That was the trivia tidbit, and that's tonight's episode, E.T. You guys ready for the summary?
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay, here we go. Strangely hard to summarize for a movie I've seen 1,000 times. E.T. Preteen young boy Elliot, who lives in Southern California, thinks he hears a noise in his backyard one fateful night. He's scared of what might be out there, but his curiosity overrules his fear, and he continues to investigate. Finally, through a trail of carefully placed Reese's Pieces, he lures the strange creature into his room and forms a bond with what he soon learns is an alien, an extraterrestrial that he later names E.T. All right, it's time for opening thoughts. Now, did everybody, Devin, I lent you the copy, so I imagine you rewatched it. Nate, did you rewatch it, or you just trusted your memory?
I rewatched it, and in fact, I had seen it. Andrea had never seen it, and we watched it recently. So I saw it a couple months ago. And then I watched it yesterday, too.
It's just occurred to me, just as we're about to start the opening thoughts, that the 3 of us here on the internet are within 3 blocks of each other. This is the first time the 3 of us have all done a show together, and we are so close. I mean, I could get on one of my rants, and Nate could run over and pop on this screen by the time I'm done. He's a very fast runner. So anyway, it's time for opening thoughts, and always funny Nate Shelkey. I'll let you go first.
Well, it is a great alien fable, or is it a documentary? You decide, depends on how you feel about aliens.
Okay. Devin always struggles with opening thoughts, so he really struggles getting it to 10 words or less. Let's see how he does. Devin, Opening thoughts?
Well, I was thinking that maybe this time I would purposely try to make it longer so that I could give
Okay, that's his opening thought, ladies and gentlemen. His time is up.
so that I could give Nate time to run over to your place and we could test that out.
Well, that's cute, but why don't you just give me your opening thoughts?
It's a wonderful, charming film that stands up the test. It stands the test of time beautifully, and is also a lot darker than people remember, and that's an interesting thing to talk about.
Okay, still not very good at opening thoughts. It's interesting that you said that, though, in that I think he's owning it now. I think he's just saying, I don't care about your rules about my thoughts. I'm just gonna keep going.
I cannot be caged.
You can't stop Devin. You can only hope to contain him. Every time I watch it, I feel like that it always stands. But this last time, 2 days ago, and I had screened it in March 29th, 2017. So I'd seen it about a year and a half ago. I screened it in New York. And this last time, I didn't connect with it as much, but I think my mind was elsewhere. In terms of the screening on March 29th, obviously it's an old favorite to everyone that was at the screening. They bristled at some of the new elements in the CGI upgrade. We watched the 2002 restored version or whatever. The discussion was great, though, because we discovered a lot of new things about it, regardless of how many times we watched it. And I'll get to that when we do the T word. As for my opening thoughts, I call it an innocuous masterpiece. And that'll bring us right into this discussion. And I think the first thing I want to talk about in terms of ET is I think that ultimately the thing that makes it work is the direction. It's Steven Spielberg's direction that pulls it all together. And as we'll discuss later, I feel like the screenplay on its surface is a little trite. Spielberg finds the magic in it and is able to create and maintain this tone that is ultimately kind of magical to me. By grounding the film in reality and with its depiction of the modern family of the 80s, the more fantastical elements of the film feel more plausible. I think it has a great mix of humor, real drama, sci-fi, and to some degree, horror, at least as it relates to the scientists and the way he films them for the first 3/4 of the movie. Some argue that the film gets a little overly saccharine at times, but I feel it stops just short of crossing that line. Everything feels earned, and the last 20 minutes get me every single time. Guys, Steven Spielberg's work as far as this tone that he creates. Devin, you want to go first?
Sure. The dark quality, which always creeps up on me in this film. And
can you be more specific as to what you're referring to?
Even when it's not the obviously dark portions, such as the portrayal of the scientists and obviously never seeing any of their faces until the end, and the exhaust coming out of their trucks and other vehicles, and repeatedly going back to the exhaust coming out of their vehicles, like showing how bad and ominous,
and how they pollute.
The contrast between that and the aliens technology, which, you know, for some reason is silent and beautiful. Even aside from those obvious dark elements, I really noticed on this viewing how much of it is about this family is in turmoil because the parents are separated, and all the kids are really, really suffering with that, as well as the mother.
The absent father figure is a consistent theme throughout Spielberg's work.
In a way, you could argue the entire story, the entire alien story, is just a metaphor for Elliot, having a bit of a traumatic episode with the loss of having his father in his life. And
this sounds like T-word territory when we talk about themes, but before I dismiss it entirely, I just want to ask, are you suggesting that maybe Elliot is imagining the whole thing?
Yes, I would say that that's a reach, but I think that if you go through, I kept coming back to it 6 or 7 times as I was watching. I was saying to myself, oh, here's another example where that might not really be happening. It's just another manifestation of his pain.
It tracks. I mean, it's hard to prove. It's told from his perspective. It can go either way. It's either maybe that's the case and that was the idea all along, where they were subtle about it, or they were just shooting it from his perspective and the way he views the world. But I think either way, that could work.
Yeah, either way, it lands the theme, which, yeah, we can talk about later.
Nate, are you still awake?
Yeah, barely. First off, I just want to say that the aliens' technology is cleaner because it's primarily powered by speak and spell and
and Reese's Pieces.
But the tone, I love the tone. Like I said in my opening, that it's a fable. You know, it's like a fairy tale, but it from outer space. Because I agree, like, it's right on the edge. You talk about like crying during the movie, and you know that it's going for that, but it still works for me. It's great. I will say, like, I sense the dark thing, and I always forget about the opening scene, though. I always remember the opening shot, but the opening scene with the other aliens, it is kind of dark. And it's weird because you have the whole thing of like making the scientists as bad guys. And it's like, but are they, you know?
And I have very specific thoughts on that a little later. Before we do that, I do want to stay in direction and just talk about the shot selection, which Spielberg's always been a master at. Like, he's a great filmic storyteller. He pretty much always knows exactly what to show you and when. And I also admire, and it stands out in this film, he's not afraid to go wide. And it's more than just establishing shots. A lot of modern filmmakers avoid that. So it's not necessarily wide shots in the beginning or at the end of scenes. These are shots that are potentially right in the middle of the scenes, or he plays some scenes out, you know, completely wide. Those are the shots that stuck with me. And I think about, there's a backyard shot.
That shot where he walks out to the shed is a painting.
Yeah, it's gorgeous. Also, some of the kitchen table scenes were shot wide, and we get a more complete sense of the family, like the sort of the chaos that the absent father has left them in. Those shots really landed for me. And he punches in every now and then, but a lot of them play wide, and it feels you're like peeking in at a real family going through what they're going through. I love the lighting in that scene. It's a little underexposed in just the right way.
In particular, the family scene, I always think about too, because I agree with you in that when you go wide, you see the weird triangle table that they have that's like a banquette. It just kind of underscores like this house and this family is a mess. You know?
He did a great job with that in Close Encounters too. Like, just sort of the chaos of the modern family was very vivid. And the other choice, when I think about shot selection, we hinted at this a little bit, but shooting the scientists as faceless creatures, suggesting they are ominous, scared the crap out of me as a kid. And their invasion of the house was amazingly done. The way he used the flashlights and the cord slamming the chair against the wall. Great details, great storytelling with his shots.
Yeah, I agree. I would go back to some of the shots even in the earlier sections of the film where it's just some of the more, you know, quote unquote normal, standard, non-sci-fi sections of the movie where you're just inside their house, and it could be like they're hiding a new puppy. It could be like this is not a sci-fi thing at all. They just got a puppy and didn't tell their mom. All of those shots, the way that they have the conspiratorial look to them because they don't have any lights on, it looks like it's all just the lights coming through the blinds. And there's so many of those shots. There's so many of these shots that are just so dark and a little bit melancholy. Like, a lot of it reminded me of whatever moments of 10-year-old melancholy that we all share of growing up in suburbia. He's a master.
I love just the sequence of Gertie's getting a good night story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And with the shutters, it's so pretty. And it's like, and he does that a couple times, like underscoring the childhood aspect that like E.T. is like a stand-in for a child, you know, and like also like the shot, which is very funny, but also it's just a great shot idea is when hiding in the closet with all the toys, you know.
That moment in the Peter Pan story is about the sacrifice that Tinkerbell makes for Peter Pan. And it's almost sort of echoing Elliot's sacrifices to get E.T. back home. So I think that Peter Pan element is more than just sweet. It actually has some resonance, I think.
It struck me this time they were having that moment simultaneously. It's not just parallel in the ways you mentioned about the sacrifice and what they're talking about, but it's also parallel just in the sense that he's becoming his parent in a way. He's telling him a little bedtime story while she's telling her a little bedtime story.
And it's ultimately a small moment, but I mean, and then with the ellipsis at the end of him Elliot putting his arm around E.T. at the end, a very sweet moment that gets close to the saccharine level, but just stops short of being over the top. The other thing shot-wise that I wanted to mention, maybe gone a little too far on this, but I did want to mention the reaction shots. Spielberg's a master at that as well. A lot of young directors forget to use reaction shots, and I've talked about it before, but constantly throughout this movie he's doing a great job of reminding us who's in the scene and how they're feeling and what they're thinking. And so even outside of the world of Elliot and E.T., whether it's the mom or Gertie or Michael, any of those people. And I mean, obviously at the end is when the reaction shots at the end is when that's most noticeable, but it happens throughout the film in a really terrific way. Anything on that, guys, before I move on to the next thing?
Yes, that sells the movie for me, is like the glory that is like this, you know, 8-year-old Henry Thomas, like, because it's like, for the shed scene, like that, just seeing his face, like it sells the thing that whatever, Rick Baker creature you're going to see, it's like we believe it because of him.
But it's not Rick Baker though, right? It's like Carlo somebody.
I think it is Rick Baker, isn't it?
I don't think so. Why don't you look it up while Devin talks?
It says something about childhood as a whole, I think.
The reaction shots do?
All the reaction shots in this film, it seems to be almost suggesting, especially since we are not seeing any of the grown-ups except the mother. The teacher, we never see his face, and so on. It's like Peanuts, where you only hear the wah, 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 wah. If it's a grown-up, it's just gobbledygook.
And that's pretty intentional, especially with the monotone nature of that teacher's voice. I think the Peanuts reference was...
Absolutely. The reaction shots that you're talking about, it goes hand in hand with that in the sense that it's suggesting when you're telling a story from a child's point of view that way, think about how out of control they are. They have so little control over their world, even less control than we have as adults. When you're telling a story from their point of view, so much of it is about just reacting to all these much bigger things than they are all around them that they have a choice either to fear or just be in wonder at.
Right. Also in this concept of direction, we're still in direction, and I've got a couple more things for it. That's how good it was. Working with this particular editor, and normally Spielberg works with Michael Kahn, but in this case, he worked with Carol Littleton, who I think did a terrific job. I'd forgotten how brisk the film was. It raced through its first 90 minutes to lead up to the finale, where the film does take its time at the finale, but that's fine with me. I think it's perfect. And as from an editing point of view, the parallel action when Elliot is at school is a masterpiece of editing. It's tight, but also full of meaning, humor, and important plot stuff. So guys, editing in general or that parallel action sequence, which I just think is pretty brilliant.
That scene is great because it's like you don't have to, like, later it's explained, out loud, but like that's great direction because nobody says anything, but like once E.T. finds the beer, and then all of a sudden Elliot starts acting drunk, and making moony eyes that I didn't realize it until
Erika Leniak!
Exactly.
Yeah. It's important, but he uses humor to get the point across. And it's also exciting, too, towards the end. It has so much to do with the theme. So much happens in that. Is it a 7-minute sequence, maybe 8?
It's also even got some, I'm fairly certain they were not accidental, biblical references.
That's coming up. Let's put a pin in that. I've got a lot on that. So the other thing that Spielberg is great in this movie is, and he doesn't do it in all his movies, but his use of iconography here is outstanding. And he might not play around with that as much again until Schindler's List. But, obviously there's the flowers representing the connection between Elliot and E.T. Like the film, it falls short of just being too much. It walks a delicate balance, and it was a risky choice, but they went to that well just enough. One more time might have been too much. The keys, Peter Coyote's keys, possibly the keys to the universe, as scientists are potentially the ones to hold. It also creates a great sound cue, so it works from a practical level as well. It became a symbol of fear and potentially corruption. As you know, that was more of a red herring. E.T.'s lights within his body, with his chest and his finger representing E.T.'s life force. The speak and spell literally representing communication and the power thereof. And the frogs that we just talked about representing the captivity that E.T. might face if caught by Peter Coyote's team. You guys might have come up with some more, but anything on this use of iconography? Devin, you go first this time.
You just hit a lot of the ones that I had in mind. I'd have to think for a minute about others.
Yeah, you don't need to come up with more. I tried to come up with,
I think two other things would be, like, as you mentioned before, the moon.
Yeah.
Even like Gertie talks about it, it's like he's the man in the moon, and setting up, talk about the wide shot, like the most beautiful image from the film. Then also the Reese's Pieces themselves, like a breadcrumb. It's like Hansel and Gretel, like this thing going along with the fable idea.
The only thing about the Reese's Pieces I would say is they don't resonate throughout the film as much. They're done by the end of the first act. If they came back, by the time they connect, they're sort of done.
Speaking of coming back, what struck me this time that I didn't remember from the last time I watched it was that major iconic shot of him going in silhouette past the moon is repeated. He goes with his friends past the sun when they're in the escape scene. And I had forgotten that.
They're leading to the dawn of a new morning, essentially.
Instead of the moon, it's the sun. There's so much you could talk for hours about the iconography of the moon and the sun and the
Yeah,
fact
they're
that
related, I think, very tightly there. So I'm going to move on to performances. Did anybody watch, incidentally, that sound off that we did, episode 51.4, where I counted down the top child 5 performances of all time?
no.
I'm not certain that I did.
As I mentioned in that episode, I listed Henry Thomas' performance as the best ever by a child actor, which we defined as 14 and under. It may be sci-fi, but he goes on quite an emotional roller coaster. And the scenes where Elliot and E.T. are emotionally linked give Thomas a chance to really show off his range, and he meets the challenge with aplomb. Don't undervalue Thomas's performance in the success of E.T. Now, granted, Spielberg has always been great with kids. All the kids in this movie are terrific, but that doesn't take away from what Thomas gave us. A very modern kid who deals with an unusual situation in a plausible and realistic way. He plays it straight, and the rest of the world was hooked. Guys, how do you feel about this major claim of mine? Henry Thomas is the greatest kid performance of all time. Devin, as a former kid actor, you can go first.
It's so hard for me to even talk about this. It is very personal to me. I was in between, I think, Drew Barrymore's age and his age.
You were up for this part? Is that what you're telling me?
I was not up for this part, no. Because our memories are so malleable, given our hindsight and given all these other things that we now think about. But I honestly think that his performance had an impact on me that was integral to my decision to start to pursue acting professionally at age 11.
Wow.
It was just completely natural to him. Back then, it was very natural to me, too. I didn't have that opportunity of being in a film like this, but in terms of just relating to the goal of that, relating to the goal of putting together a performance like that, it is so beautifully simple when you really think about it. You know, we end up doing somersaults later in life to recapture that. You could hear Spielberg telling him the situation and him just being like, okay, and doing that situation, just being that situation.
Living it.
And you have the emotional sensitivity and the intelligence to just actually listen to a director and make those moments happen.
In that sound off where I first brought it up, Davey pointed to the scene where he fakes crying so that the scientists don't suspect anything. Davey pointed out that he's a kid acting like a kid acting. And the contrast between the acting that we've gotten used to and him pretending was so stark. It was a very viable moment and it's sort of a highlight in a performance anyway. Nate, anything on Henry Thomas?
I don't think there's any question, but I did remember one while we were talking was like, I was like, who's the kid in the Black Stallion? And for a second, I thought it was Henry Thomas again, you know, so it's sort of similar. But
same writer, though. Melissa Matheson wrote Black Stallion.
Oh, did she really? Yeah, it's a wonderful movie as well. Perhaps not as like standing the test of time in people's collective memory, but just visually. But like, I watched before this because I was just remembering. It was like, have you guys ever watched like that audition tape that's that Henry Thomas did? Yeah. It's amazing. I mean, he's like, it's just phenomenal. Like that he plays it so raw, but it's not over the top, you know. And it's just like it's just right there. And to me, like, yeah, he makes the movie because of you're just drawn to it, and then he cares, but not in a whiny way. Like it could have easily gone that way. And Drew's great as well, but like you just see like the skill that this kid has, you know. Whereas like sometimes when Gertie does something, you're like, okay, she's being coached a little bit, you know. But I agree. I think it's natural.
Yeah, absolutely, and I agree about Gertie as well. I think it was interesting that out of all the four main people in the cast, she's the one that really had the most prolific career. That strikes me as odd given how good everyone is in the movie. And that includes a performance that doesn't get talked about as much that I think is actually Oscar worthy. And I'm referring to Dee Wallace, who follows us on Twitter, incidentally, which doesn't mean that's not why I'm saying nice things about her performance. I think she's terrific as the mom. She gives a very lived-in performance. She feels effortlessly real. Her angst, her stress, her pain that is associated with trying to raise 3 kids by herself in the early 80s. And when the stakes are raised in a highly unexpected way, she does everything she can to protect her family. It's a very believable, touching performance, very honest to me. Nate?
I think she is great. I like the little like comic touches that she'll do sometimes, like the Mexico,
I was thinking that too.
It's really funny because she does different layers with it. It's great. Yeah, I guess it's like at that scene is where you find out where's the dad. For so long, you're like, this huge house, it's a mess. Where's the, you know, and it's, yeah, she's doing everything she can to just keep it together. I think she's really vulnerable and it's touching. Yeah, I think she's gives a great performance.
Yeah, and I don't know why she doesn't get talked about. It definitely is Oscar-worthy. Best Supporting Actress, 1982. I think it's very possible. Anything to add on that, on Dee Wallace, Devin?
I just agree with what you guys are saying. I was going to mention her. I was particularly taken when I rewatched last night. I was particularly taken by her performance, relating to it a bit more in some ways than the last time I watched. But I think she's fantastic, and all those moments you mentioned and more.
All right, so running out of time, I do want to talk about if the film has a weakness, and I don't want to dwell on this too much because there's not much to say. I do think the screenplay is the weakness if looked at on its own devices, and that's stripping away the Spielberg magic. But I think on its surface, it's kind of trite. It's a basic friendship tale we've seen 1,000 times, usually with an animal instead of an alien. It's Spielberg who elevates the material to a different level. If you really look at it, you just look at the bones. The psychic connection between the characters, however, is a special idea, deepening their bond to a level other films really haven't been able to duplicate. And it was nominated for an Oscar, the screenplay. It has a straightforward 3-act structure, which is fine. You definitely notice it. The other thing ultimately that's interesting is by the end, there's a lack of a real antagonist. The scientist as antagonist is kind of a forced thing. And I'm not saying it's a bad thing. It's just interesting. There's a red herring antagonist, but ultimately in this movie, there's no real antagonist, which I think is kind of fascinating. I don't think it's a bad screenplay. I just don't think that's what makes the movie special.
Well, or is the antagonist growing up? Because I think it honestly maybe is. It's the death of childhood and stuff, going back to Peter Pan and such.
Yeah.
And I was just thinking, like, I agreed, like, it's pretty conventional, other than, that he's an alien. You
already mentioned Black Stallion. I mean, the structure between the two is fairly similar.
Yeah. Stranger in a strange land, by accident.
Bonding with one particular.
2 hearts beat as one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Devin.
When I watched this time, what really struck me, specifically the structure, is how early all of those dark threads and all of the threads that play out in the third act are started. If it were a more typical modern screenplay, the first 2 acts would have been more carefree, I think. The first 2 acts would have been more like, oh, how lovely, he's bonding with this guy, and we would have been able to enjoy it more without any of the dark.
I actually disagree. I think it fits in with the modern screenplay structure in the sense that, before you get carefree, you need, like, a lot of you have to cook people in the first 5 minutes is what they say. And so a lot of movies start with an action scene, even if it's a flash forward. Alpha, for example, is one that, sort of randomly started with an action scene and then took us back. That's what the opening was about, to get us hooked.
A lot of them have the opening set piece, but I'm talking about just literally like how large a percentage of the screen time was some of those dark, foreboding elements, partially because of Spielberg, yes, but I think partially they were there in the screenplay as well. These darker threads that were really there throughout the whole first and second acts. When it got to some of those elements half hour in, I remember looking at the thing and saying, wow, we're only like half hour in and there's still like another hour and 25 minutes of this movie. I was like, wow, is the third act going to be an hour and 25 minutes long?
But the third act is longer. Like, it moves so fast, and then we get to the third act and it just sort of slams on the brakes, especially that ending is 20 minutes. And it doesn't feel like it, but it earns the 20 minutes.
E.T. is supposedly millions of years old, so it takes a while to die, guys.
Fair enough. His walk up the spaceship ramp is so slow.
I mean, his feet are so short. Yeah, I actually wrote that down earlier. I wrote down, like, how fast does E.T. run? Like, in the opening scene, he's running,
waddling,
so short, but those scientists can't catch up to him. It's kind of crazy.
Yeah. I'm going to move on to themes because I have 3 alone, and it sounds like you guys have some of your own. You guys okay to move to the next segment?
Yes.
It's time for the T word. And I don't know why we call it that anymore, because Davey's gone. He's left the show now. The whole reason we called it this is because he was afraid to say the word themes. He doesn't like themes. It ruins his movie watching. That's why we call it the T word. These guys are not afraid of themes, I don't think. Right, Devin?
I embrace them with all my heart.
Yes, you do. I've got 3. Nate, you were talking about maybe this is about growing up. Do you want to start there?
Sure. Like you say, many of his movies feature an absence of childhood, absence of father, which means these kids have to grow up,
faster than they normally would.
Yeah, that's true in this. You have this element that comes into his life. It's like, here's something that is like a life preserver for him. Everything that he does, too, with the movie, where he shoots everything from like 4 feet high so that it's like your kid. Just that kids versus adults, even Peter Coyote. We really could conceive of Elliot would grow up to be Peter Coyote, you know?
Absolutely. That's why I think that close-up of their hands disconnecting that way is so important.
Like all of that, like with the fairy tale elements of it, with the moon, like making a wish, believe, like all of it feeds into this Peter Pan thing.
But I also think, and this is what's important about the Peter Coyote character too, and this is not my notes because I didn't have this. I didn't think of this. I'm off the rails a little bit, but it makes me think that there's also the suggestion too that yes, you need to grow up, but don't lose that the passion of your childhood. Don't lose that potentially optimistic point of view. Don't become cynical. Don't let the death of childhood mean the death of hope.
Because ultimately, that's what saves AT, not science. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Love. Don't lose love, even though you have to grow up. I face all the adult things that the mom does. So yeah, that's what that makes me think of. Devin, before you get to your own themes, how do you feel about this one?
Well, I frankly, everything you just said segues perfectly into the main theme that I wanted to add, which is love is simultaneously, pain and bliss.
I just laugh because that's such a Devin thing to say.
I mean,
is Kelly there right now? Is Kelly laughing as hard as I am?
She's in the bedroom.
I hope those of you that watch the show have gotten to know Devin a little bit to have fully expected him to say something.
Look at the final scene when he says goodbye to him. He says, "Come," and of course that can't happen. He says, "Stay," and of course that can't happen.
Super simple, but very powerful.
Very powerful. Everything behind those words. The conclusion that they both come to right away is, "I'll be right here." I'm pointing to the heart and pointing to the head.
That ties it back. That's part of growing up, learning that lesson about needing to separate from those that you love at times. You know what I mean? Moving on. So I think that ties in nicely to Nate's theme. Also, the third of my themes, it might be the most powerful element of the film, and I had it third because it might be among the more obvious ones, and that's friendship in general and the power of it. It doesn't do it differently than a lot of similar films. I have Black Stallion here as one of the examples. Black Stallion, The Yearling, Old Yeller. It doesn't do it differently than those films, but it does it much better. It really hammers home how important those bonds that we make in our lives are as a part of our own life force. Our friends and loved ones keep us going, and they will always be right here and here. And that's how I feel about these guys, Devin and Nate. They will always be a part of me, regardless whether I'm in New York or here in LA or anywhere else I go.
Aww.
Now JP's trying to make us cry the same way Spielberg does in this movie.
There you go. What will make you not cry is my other themes. And Devin, you've already talked about this big one, and this is the one that came up in the screening, and it really opened some people's eyes. Jay Money, one of our old hosts, alluded to this anytime the film came up in conversation, and now it's the time to dig into it a little more detail. And as I said, it brought it up at the screening, and it opened up a lot of people's eyes, and it made them really think, and it really made the discussion really interesting because they were like, oh, wow. And I'm talking about the Christian allegory involved throughout the film. Obviously, like Jesus, E.T. came to us from the heavens, and he has the ability to heal, even the ability to somewhat to resurrect. And the religious rulers of Jesus' time who hope to control him are replaced by a more modern religion. Science and scientists are the priests of this religion. The liberation of the frogs is another connection to the Bible. You can look at Moses as far as that's concerned, but Jesus was trying to save the Jews from the Romans. Even one of his few but most repeated lines, meaning E.T.'s most few but repeated lines, sums up a lot of Jesus's teachings, especially the Sermon on the Mount. Be good. The connection to Christianity extends to the ad campaign. As you can see behind me, features two fingers touching, which is reminiscent of what, Nate?
Sistine Chapel, David.
The creation of Adam, yes. The ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. So, I mean, like, certainly somebody got it somewhere along the way in the PR department. Yeah, I mean, I think the Christian allegory of the film is very deep and baked throughout this film in a very meaningful, powerful way. For those of you that, I don't think either of you guys are very religious, but it is interesting how much of it is present in this movie. It certainly made a lot of people look at the movie differently. Devin?
I'm going to do the opposite of my opening thoughts tendency, which is just to say I just agree with everything you just said, and I have nothing to add.
Oh, wow. Good, because we're running along on time. Nate?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's there for that kind of reading, but it's also just of a, more baked in of like golden rule kind of thing. It's not as like sledgehammer like Peter Weir and Dead Poets Society or something like that,
Right. And I mean, like, you can say that Jesus sort of went through, Joseph Campbell's, mythology of the hero, journey of the hero.
Yeah.
So, I mean, a lot of stories can have a similar connection, but somehow it feels like E.T. has a lot more connection to certainly the path of Jesus than a lot of films. And Devin, it just occurred to me, you kind of look like Spielberg right now.
This was purposeful. I know that he's always got a baseball cap when he's directing on set, so I went with it.
My third and final theme is about the delicate balance of science. And as we talked about throughout the show, the pseudo antagonists of the films are scientists, and I very carefully said pseudo antagonists because I'm not sure that they are obviously antagonists. Now, although they try and help and save E.T. at times, their motivations are much more clinical than Elliot's. And this is a theme that also lies beneath Close Encounters, for example. It suggests that science is important and all, but can't ignore the human element, the emotional factors, and how their work affects the people around them. It's frequently not less important than your research scientists, and I think this film wants to make that clear. Like, it's not bemoaning science, but it's suggesting that maybe some things are more important, and science needs to heed that lesson. That's what I mean about the delicate balance of science. Devin, since you're nodding, you get to go first.
That was another thing that came up when I was watching last night. When Elliot keeps saying to them, "You're killing him, you're killing him." And obviously they're all trying and they all have very positive intention, and everything they're doing is that they do want to keep him alive.
The reasons for wanting that are different than Elliot.
And that's part of the problem, but then also their methods, they have lost their way. They've lost sight of some of the central elements that you need to really keep someone alive.
Yeah.
And to not just keep someone alive literally, but to keep someone alive in a larger sense.
And that ties into my friendship thing and the power, how our friends are our life force to some degree.
Right.
Nate, anything on this delicate balance of science?
Two things. One is, it could be argued that Elliot is the one that gets E.T. sick because Elliot coughs first and has the first sign of that. And since they feel each other, maybe it's Elliot giving him a cold that he does not have the antibodies for, and there you are. It's a whole like Native American.
I disagree. I feel like it was the Earth's atmosphere wearing its way on, because Robert McNaughton, Michael hints earlier that Elliot's looking bad before that E.T.'s looking bad before Elliot even coughs.
I have to say this because I've always thought, and this is like, again, the 20th time I've seen this, and this is the 20th time I've felt it this way. I've always thought that it's because E.T. is separated from his kind, and he needs to have that connection. He can't be so far away from his people, and that's why his heart, because when they all connect, when it's time to go,
it's glowing.
It's time to go back on the ship. All of their hearts glow the same way. They're all connected. They all have that psychic connection and that heart connection.
And that's so potentially how he survives in the ice bucket.
Elliot helps him live a bit longer because he developed this bond with him. If he had not found Elliot, he might have withered away and died a few days sooner. But because he develops this bond with Elliot, at least he's able to be kept on that life support. But then that's not enough because he's used to having hundreds of his own kind around.
I buy that 100%, which debunks Nate's first point. So
okay, my second point is the idea that wonder drives science. So many kids grew up watching Star Trek and then became scientists who invented the things that were on Star Trek.
Which is great, but also the tendency of some science to ignore how that affects the people that are currently alive in the planet, whether it be physically or emotionally.
Yeah.
Again, I mentioned Close Encounters, how they scared people and faked a whole plague or something, right? To clear out the area. Was it Devil's Plateau or Devil's Canyon or something?
Yeah.
So that's another thing that keeps coming up in Spielberg's oeuvre. All right, you guys ready to move on?
Yes.
Okay, now this is something both you guys are very familiar with, and we have another CMS tomorrow, so it'll happen again. But it's time for the Classic Movie Showdown! Classic Movie Showdown is when we have two films go head-to-head in NCAA-style brackets, and we have all sorts of brackets. We have one for each decade, one for all the Best Picture winners, and so forth and so on. E.T.'s in one of those. E.T.'s in several, but we got one that we're looking at tonight. But before we do, we're going to go over the rules. Davey's not around to read the rules, so let's turn to Nate. Nate, will you read the rules for us?
No. Yes. Number one, Seating criteria varies from bracket to bracket. Number 2, films that JB hosted screenings need to be 15 years or older. 3, voters are eligible if they see both films within a 12-month period. 4, voters must see both films in JB's presence. And 5, JB is ineligible to vote, but breaks ties.
There you go. I can break ties if there is a tie. Both of these guys are multi-time voters. They've, both have been to many CMSs. Devin has more votes than anybody in history. There you go. Both of these guys are very familiar with what happens. So the vote happens at these screenings, and then we report it to you now. But before I reveal the winners, I'm going to let these guys opine. Tonight we're talking about the highest grossing films bracket. So these are the 64 highest grossing films of all time. And that I created into a bracket, and it's 64 highest grossing films adjusted for inflation. So it's not Avengers that is number 1 or Avatar. It's Gone with the Wind would be number 1 overall. E.T. is a number 1 seed, which means in a first round, Devin, it would go up against what?
A 16 seed.
A 16 seed, and it's a film that we recently reviewed on this show. Ladies and gentlemen, here is the bracket for tonight's showdown. Number 16, The Sixth Sense from 1999, directed by M. Night Shyamalan. I believe it's a film both of you guys have seen.
Yes.
So as of the time I made this bracket, it was probably in the 60th or 61st or 62nd highest grossing film of all time, adjusted for inflation. Like I said, the votes already happened. The biggest gap you can have, 1 versus 16, it's a tough matchup for The Sixth Sense, but we'll see how these guys feel about it. Let's see who gets to vote first. Devin, what is your preference?
I'm going to have to go with E.T.
Okay.
I like The Sixth Sense a lot. There's a few things about it that are perhaps more consistent. There's a couple weird flares in E.T. Like the kid with the earphones.
He's a bad actor.
Close up of him on the bike, and some of that's a little silly. So there's like a couple of places where E.T. maybe goes a little off the rails.
Did you know that Sixth Sense, they stage whole scenes where the woman completely ignores him? We're supposed to be surprised that he's a ghost? Spoiler alert, guys, on an episode in The Sixth Sense, in episode 51.3, I didn't like The Sixth Sense.
I can't judge it that way because I had seen it very recently, actually, very much aware of what the secret was. I can never go back and have that experience, if I would have guessed it or not.
I knew there was a secret going into the theater. I didn't know what it was, and I was going in, and I'm like, well, that can't be it. That can't be the secret. And it was very disappointing. But anyway.
Sixth Sense is perhaps more consistently polished in a modern sense, but E.T. wins out to me because it's got so much more going on. It's so much more ambitious. It covers so much more ground in terms of both heady stuff and hearty stuff, literally and figuratively. And so it doesn't matter that once or twice it has a little hiccup. Overall, it's a bigger film and a more successful film, aside from box office.
Nate, E.T. versus Sixth Sense.
It's E.T. It's not close. However, I did watch Sixth Sense because it's streaming right now. I watched it recently, and I love that movie. And here's my hot take: you don't even need the twist. If you take that very last scene out, I think it's a great movie because Toni Collette slays me. I mean, the scene that is with the old woman in the bike accident, that brings me to tears every single time.
I assume you didn't watch episode 51.3, my review of The Sixth Sense either, did you, Nate?
Not sure.
Still not sure. He doesn't remember what he does these days. My pitch to them is lose the opening scene altogether, lose the flashback with Donnie Wahlberg, cut it all together. My other recommendation was make the movie about Cole and his mom as Cole figures out how he can use this ability to help instead of constantly be afraid. The journey should be about Cole growing up, also about the death of childhood, obviously in an extreme way, and how Cole realizes how he can help people instead of being afraid all the time. That, to me, would have been a very compelling movie instead of inserting this dead psychologist character into it that doesn't really have an arc and is not really interesting or well acted.
Great child actor, though, too, as well.
I was asked about that when I did the top 5, and I said he'd be like maybe 8 or 9. I thought about him a lot, but I feel like I had 5. I think we're agreed he's not better than Henry Thomas.
Oh no, he's not. But he is great.
He's very good. He got an Oscar nomination. Henry Thomas did not. Is there any argument with Henry Thomas being the best child actor of all time? You both said you liked him, but was anybody real have an issue with that statement?
No. I think he's fantastic. I don't even. That's what I was trying to think. Like the only one that came to mind, just like that, was the Black Stallion kid. But I don't know.
Yeah, and I said best child actor. I meant best child performance because obviously Henry Thomas didn't do as many roles as somebody like Shirley Temple or Elizabeth Taylor or somebody like that. So okay, it's time to reveal the winner. Now that these guys have both sanctioned E.T. And let's see what the New York crowd had to say about this one. E.T. versus Sixth Sense. The winner is. It was E.T. and it was unanimous. Tough matchup for the Sixth Sense. Most of the audience liked it. You guys seem to like it more than they did. They liked Sixth Sense, but they love E.T. It was pretty obvious to them. They were excited to see it again, like an old friend or warm blanket on a cold night. And ultimately, it was the emotional resonance of E.T. that gave it the win. It doesn't sound like you guys are too surprised.
No, not at all. That would be the only criticism. Is it too treacly?
I feel like it's just the right side of the borderline.
Yeah.
I agree that it walks that line. It falls just short of it. But I can see the argument. I don't think it ever crosses that line for me personally. But I also watched it very young, so maybe that's part of it. And for what it's worth, E.T. is my 40th favorite film of all time. That's your fun little note because some of you out there like to keep track of my top 100 when I bring it up. But E.T. is in number 40. Nate, did you ever find out who designed E.T.? I believe it was.
You're right. It is that
Carlos somebody.
Carlos. Now I switched over to the Black Stallion, so I don't have it in front of me. But it's the Carlo person, yes.
Carlo person. Do you guys? Here's a trivia tidbit that you guys might know. The voice of E.T. Do you guys know who did the voice?
I saw it recently.
Do you want to reveal it for me then?
Well, okay. So it's a combination of people, though, right?
Right, but the famous person, the Oscar nominee.
The famous person is Deborah Winger. Yeah.
Deborah Winger
that's
is
right.
one of the voices of E.T. Yeah, the most famous of the voices. I'm surprised you didn't know that, Devin.
I did, and I forgot.
I don't think we've ever reviewed a Deborah Winger film on the No Name Cinema Society.
Oh.
Do we have any Deborah Winger films in 1988? I don't know if we do.
Class action.
You thinking Legal Eagles?
Officer
right.
and Gentleman.
That's the same year as E.T. Nominated against E.T.
Oh, okay.
All right, guys, it's time for closing thoughts. Nate.
Guys, I think that pizza was still good. I don't know why they didn't eat it. It looks perfectly fine to me.
Yeah. Devin.
The magic of this film, and I think magic is an appropriate word, was somehow present even in the viewing of it. I couldn't really get out of bed at that point. Kelly was asleep. Her sister was staying in the living room because she was leaving on a plane this morning. And so aside from having to pause it for, a bathroom break and something else, like I was kind of trapped there watching on her laptop, and her cat was on my leg. And so I was literally trapped for the last few minutes watching this, and I could see that it started to say, you're running on reserve power. Your battery is running on reserve power unless you plug the laptop in as soon as possible. And it was this race against time to see if I would have to get up, spoil the calm of the room, perhaps wake Kelly up, perhaps wake the cat up, perhaps have to get in the way of me watching it with continuity. And literally, as the final crescendo of John Williams' absolutely sublime score came to its climax, dun, 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 and then dun, dun, and then you see the rainbow in the sky, and it's the final moment of the film, and that's when her laptop conked out.
I will say, I went to see John Williams perform at the Hollywood Bowl, conduct the orchestra, and he didn't play this. He walked off stage, but then he came out for an encore, and then he played the 19-minute cue that is the end of E.T. It was a pretty special moment.
I literally had to stop myself from laughing out loud when it happened because of how perfect the timing was.
Devin leads a charmed life. This is the magic that happens to him every single day. 2 women in his apartment, E.T. playing on with John Williams' score. That he needed to watch it. The universe wouldn't let technology take its course until Devin was through with it.
It's true.
So don't you wish you were Devin, Nate?
No.
It's the magic of the film. It's not my life. It's the magic of the movie.
Anyway, all right, guys. Our next show, I don't have trivia for a new classic because we're done. We have no more classics. This is the last regular season 1. We will have our finales at the end of on Oscar week in 2019. Our next show, however, we have one more regular season show. We're going to wrap things up with our Sound Off, our Freaky segment, and Nate will be back for that. And he's got very little expectations about what that's going to be like. So I'm excited about that. He doesn't even remember the last time he was on a Sound Off, episode 46.4. I'm going to do an obscure movie discovery. Jim's going to do a second run in which he's going to talk about a film that he hadn't seen in the 1942 in review and then has since seen. And I'm supposed to count down my top 5 movie scores of all time. And that is coming up this Monday. All right, guys, we will see you both again. We're going to see Nate on Monday. And we're going to see Devin February 21st, 2019. He and Alex are doing the 1988 in review. And we've done a lot of work on that already so far.
Tough work, but someone's got to do it.
Thanks for watching, and we'll see you soon. This meeting of the No Name Cinema Society is now adjourned.